Welcome to the first edition of the Inequality Chronicles. As you will find out soon enough, this is not scripted whatsoever. All I have is a guide for me to get through this show, and I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as I can without ruining the quality of this show. Now, this will be a special edition. Typically after this episode, every future episode will only feature 4 stories. Tonight's will feature 12, and it's largely because of the fact that all of the articles I was skimming through to put on this show were just a lot more than what I was expecting. It's partially because I didn't impose a limit on myself as to how far back I can go in time to look for articles pertinent to the subject of this show. Anyways, let's proceed. Tonight's subjects, the 12, will be the rise of homeless cities, economic roadblocks for millennials, the threat posed by climate change on the distribution of food, the drowning state of our small businesses, the gas problem, our resilient glass ceiling, affordable fatness, death collectors, Pluto University, stuck in the ditch, big spenders versus bad luck, and representation without taxation. You will find out soon enough why I gave each of those stories the titles that you just heard. Now, of course, I do want to say a few things to introduce you to the format of this show. I will be using this egg timer in this episode and in future episodes to basically limit myself in how long I can discuss these articles. It's largely to make this as interesting as possible to you, so I don't become too verbose and just drone on and on like I am right now. And so basically, yeah, it's just a time limit for me. And obviously I don't have to use up all the time if I get the stories done within that time frame. Great. But it's just to let me know the time's up. Alright, I will be moving on to the first story then. Like I mentioned before, the first story is called The Rise of Homeless Cities. The title of the article for which I used this is America's Homeless, The Rise of Tent City, USA. The source is CNN Money. The author of the article is Blake Ellis, and the date of this was May 16th, 2014. The major bullet points of this article that you should be aware of are: first, all over the country, more than 100 tent cities have emerged, and only 8 have been deemed legal. Number 2, many of the citizens calling these cities home prefer to be there. They consider this to be true freedom, with genuine community as compared to the prison-like conditions of shelter life. A little side note on this bullet point is that the reason being is that the shelters are too crowded, restricts access from people with certain criminal records, and some have very prohibitive rules, including curfew, which sometimes creates conflicts with work hours. Third bullet point. The evictions launched by cities such as Camden, New Jersey, have resulted in more pain. Many citizens ended up on the streets anyways, since nearby shelters were already full. And the fourth and final bullet point of this article is that one report by the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty says that the real solution is to address the problem of unaffordable housing. Excuse me, I made my first mistake of the show. There we go. Now to let's look at some of the details of this story. First, it's an American tragedy that Americans are being forced to house themselves in tents to begin with, and find an alternative to traditional communities. I mean, quite frankly, it is a failure of our society for them to even be homeless to begin with. Secondly, for them to say that they prefer this setting, tent cities, over the arguably safer shelters is just unimaginable. I can't imagine ever putting myself in that position, but when you get desperate, you get desperate. But maybe they have a point as far as living in a shelter is concerned, with respect to their viewpoint that it's like a prison. Having the curfew, having certain restrictions on who can visit you, having, well, obviously that initial obstacle for some saying that you can't come in there if you have certain convictions against you, which to a certain degree I can understand. Like if you have certain sexual offenses, you don't want a pedophile coming in and there being families in there, but we have to make these shelters a welcome environment for people who are down on their luck at that moment in time. And that last bullet point there about the real solution to this being possibly found in affordable housing, we really have to look at this. I mean, more has to be done to ensure that people have a way to put a roof over their heads. I'm not saying just give people free homes, but if you have like a block or two full of houses that are empty, it's time for us to work together to bring these people to these homes and help them in some way get on their feet and put their families in there. I mean, it's just unconscionable for us to continue tolerating this type of situation. Either way, it's the first story I wanted you to hear. Story number 2. The economic roadblocks for millennials. This article is entitled, "Another Rude Awakening for Millennials." The source is CNBC, with the author being Kelly Holland. It was published on May 15th, 2014. The bullet points are as follows. Number 1. Less than half of college graduates from 2012 to 2013 say that they have received training in the jobs they apply for after finishing school. Employers are demanding, this is number 2 by the way, employers are demanding experience from new hires even though millennials aren't likely to have such. Number 3, part of the issue is that most employers don't want to invest the time and or money in training new hires. Of course, a side note for this I put on here is that this is despite the fact that, as the article points out, the previous generation enjoyed the access to the type of training needed. And the final bullet point is that over time something will have to budge, as the up-and-coming generation of workers isn't patient enough to tolerate this injustice. Now, let's consider a few things here. I am a part of the millennial generation, so this, hits close to home. In my recent brush with unemployment, which has now fortunately been a few years ago, I experienced this problem of looking for jobs, and there's just so many roadblocks in your way to being able to get up on your feet. And yeah, there's the issue of discrimination against the unemployed, which is a completely different subject for another day. But there's also this problem where you have so many employers who are wanting you to have prior experience that you just have no chance of ever having, because all these other jobs have gotten rid of their entry-level positions. And this is not something that the previous generations had to deal with on such a massive scale. I mean, the future, at least within the next 20 years, is going to be my generation's responsibility to take care of. I mean, if we expect the baby boomers and other older generations still living today, to be able to be provided for by my generation, we have to be able to get our foot in the door. So, yeah, something is absolutely going to have to budge right here. Otherwise, this is a recipe for economic disaster, for lack of a better expression. Alright, story number 3. The threat posed by climate change on the distribution of food. This article is entitled Climate Change Threatens Food Supply. It is published by NBC News by Allison Lynn, and it was published on May 21st. The bullet points are as follows. Number 1. Climate change is expected to deplete food production due to its impact on rainfall, temperature volatility, and the frequency of natural disasters. Despite the continuing growth of humanity's population, our food production is expected to decrease by 2% with each decade of this country if the climate crisis remains unabated. That's bullet point number 2. Number 3, an up to 3.5% increase in grocery bills is expected this year. And number 4, the first communities who will suffer will be those inhabiting the poorest countries. We can choose to live in denial about climate change for only so long. Yeah, I understand that this is a show about inequality. But climate change is real. And climate change is gradually going to affect us more and more, whether we believe in it or not. You can choose to believe in gravity, but you go out that door or you jump out that window, by all means you're going to be governed by its laws. So we are being governed by the laws of climate change right now at this moment. And it's up to us to capitalize on this moment with the small window that we have that is growing smaller and smaller every day. It's up to us to seize the moment and reverse course. Part of the tragedy of this story is that this right here, climate change, is already having an impact on our ability to survive. And communities all around the world are feeling the crunch here. They are having to tighten their belts. And in many cases, unfortunately, a lot of these communities already have tightened their belts enough and weren't getting enough to begin with. But this is going to eventually hit here at home. But as humans, it is incumbent upon us to work as one, as a species, to ensure our survival. Whether we like it or not, we as Americans, being the wealthiest country on earth, have a little bit of a responsibility to our poorer peers. They are our neighbors after all. We all call this planet home. The poorest among us, even poorer than you and I here in the United States, they're going to suffer first. Because their nations are already most likely positioned in regions of the world that are going to be hardest hit initially. But they are already too poor to care for themselves to rise to the challenge posed by climate change. So consider what's going to be hitting us here at home, the rise in our grocery bills, but also let's consider the long term here. If we don't act, we will be regretting it soon enough. Story number 4, the drowning state of our small businesses. Now, this article is entitled Crisis on Main Street, the End of Mom and Pops. It is offered by CNBC. The author is Elaine Pofelt. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. And it was published on May 15th. The bullet points are as follows. The creation of small businesses has been on a downward trend for decades, but has especially been hurt in our post-Great Recession economy. The advantages enjoyed by stores such as Walmart, which often surround these smaller companies, creates an atmosphere of lopsided competition and results in hard times for the struggling owners who sometimes report having to skip paying themselves just to honor their other obligations. That's bullet point number 2. Number 3, accessibility to loans hasn't been improved, and the recent federal budget sequester only exacerbated the situation, nearly putting some out of business altogether. Number 4, healthcare costs are still a major concern here, even with the exemptions for some in the Affordable Care Act. Now, this is another unfortunate casualty of our growing inequality. You know, small businesses are an essential part of our economy. You know, for any capitalist system to be effective, people have to be able to develop an idea and then put it to use. And many times that idea comes in the form of a business that one, starts up. Obviously, when you start up a business, you know that there is this slight chance that it's going to fail. And it just comes with the territory. I mean, that's just part of the rules. However, when you have the odds stacked against you from the get-go, it's kind of hard to blame that person or that business for never having a chance to begin with. I mean, quite frankly, the people who are being affected here, there's no even playing field for them. You know, when you start out in an atmosphere where you have big stores like Walmart, they get tax abatements, they get all other kinds of breaks. Not to mention they have so much leverage from being an international organization, or even just cross-national. They have so many advantages working in their favor. They can lower prices like ridiculously. And when these small businesses who are trying to compete really don't have those same advantages, they don't have that same access to the same sorts of tax abatements, because they don't have that negotiating power that the Walmarts have. Nor do they have all the resources available to them to just drop prices like those big name stores do. And when you have compounding on that, banks refusing to lend to you to begin with, or not offering sufficient loans, it is definitely an uphill battle. In this type of situation, there's no genuine competition. And we have ourselves to blame if we allow this to persist. Granted, this is as close to laissez-faire capitalism as you can get to a certain degree. Because we have to remember, a lot of what gives companies like Walmart an advantage is, the tax abatements, which really isn't present in, laissez-faire capitalism. They obviously, if you had true, pure capitalism, you would have no taxes to begin with. It's basically anarchy. But, in this case, they already have an advantage when it comes to that tax abatement, right from the get-go. And, companies like Walmart often are able to negotiate long-term abatements. And they may not even need a loan to begin with, but like I said, they have those resources available to where they can just spend all that money they need to build a huge facility. Put out all that advertising they need to get. Not to mention, just the name itself. It basically sells itself. In that type of situation, you don't really have fair competition. And all I'm saying is that if we really want small businesses to be able to be revived, then we have to do more. And I know I'm saying this a lot throughout this show so far, but it's true. We have to do more to make sure that they at least have a fighting chance. Alright, that's the end of that story. Now, story number 5, the gas problem. The article's title is Wall Street, Big Oil, and Your Pain at the Gas Pump. Source is CNBC. The author is Javier E. David, and it was published on May 21st. The bullet points are as follows. Number 1, gas prices have skyrocketed since February's low average price of $3.27. Number 2, Big Oil's boost from this rise has been marginal at best. Number 3, economists are worried about the continued upward trend and the danger it poses to economic growth. Side note, in fact, they feel that the price should have been headed downward for quite some time now. And number 4, as much as $20 per barrel of the price of oil is inflated by speculation. Now, as you'll find in reading this article, they do go to some length to assure you that speculation, Wall Street, is only responsible for some fraction of the boost in gas prices. But what's clear to a lot of people by now, and has been clear for quite some time, is that it is obviously inflated because the boost in gas prices is not being guided by the rules of supply and demand. Now, say whatever you want about the right of oil companies to profit off of their product. You know, that's part of capitalism. You have a right to profit, from something that you are putting out there. But the reality is that today's economy is much different than the economy of, say, 100 years ago. We are very dependent on the price of oil now than we've been ever, I believe. And any movement in the price of oil, in one way or the other, has a huge influence on economic activity, on our ability to grow as an economy. So we have to take care to make sure that these jumps in prices aren't going to cause a backlash of sorts in our economy. Because if we're not careful, then by all means we could trigger a recession just by gas prices jumping up too fast. I mean, in essence, the more gas prices go up, and the more that happens, despite other factors in the inflation rate, and as well as the cost of living, or living wages rather, whether or not people are able to afford those increases. The fact is, if those gas prices keep going up, regardless of whether or not people are able to afford it, then that just takes away disposable income. I mean, our economy is heavily dependent on consumers being able to consume, and the more those gas prices go up, the more it chips into that consuming power. And it's a pretty big number to say that out of, I think the price of oil is like $105, $103 per barrel right now, to say that roughly 20% of that is based on speculation, just people determining the price based on a prediction of how things will affect prices in the future. Sorry, that's a huge number. I mean, if I could determine my own wages based on the speculation of my future performance, and say, well, based on today, I'm going to do great in the future. I mean, that would give me, if 20% of my wages could be based on that, I would be raking in some big bucks right now, I guarantee you, if I was able to apply the same rules. But that's just not the case. And for them to say that the boost from this rise has been marginal at best for the big oil, it was a few years ago that ExxonMobil was raking in record profits, becoming the most profitable company in world history. That's it's kind of hard to ignore that. Let's just put that out there. And if you have any doubt as to big oil's influence on things, just look at how BP was able to escape any real accountability for what happened in the Gulf. Just keep that in mind. Alright, next story. Our resilient glass ceiling. The article's title is Gender Diversity Among CEOs at the Largest Companies Inches Upward. The source is Think Progress. The author is Bryce Covert, and it was published on May 12th. The bullet points are as follows. Number 1, 2 American companies, each of which are among the largest in their respective industries, just named a woman as their CEO. Number 2, 48 of the Fortune 1000 companies now have a female leading the way. Number 3, women struggle more than men to get to the top and to stay there, as they are more likely to be placed at support positions or forced out altogether on negative terms. Number 4, in countries with established gender diversity quotas, companies have observed improved performance. Now, before I proceed, I want to just say that these bullet points are extrapolated from the articles themselves. These are parts of the article that I think that you should really pay attention to. Now, these, obviously the source for some on the right-wing part of politics will be like, I just think progress, who cares what they say, but it's real data that they're using here. The fact that, yeah, we have every reason to celebrate that 2 women have been placed at the top of, significantly large companies. I mean, that's to be celebrated regardless. Now, I look forward to the day when we can ignore that and say, well, so what? Okay. Plenty of women are CEOs. I look forward to that day. We are a long ways away from that, unfortunately. It's 2014. My daughter should be expected to be able to rise to the top of a company just as much as my son can. But that's still not the reality we live in right now. And the fact is, 2014, it's still somewhat controversial. Controversial enough to get headlines that women are made the CEOs of their company. 48 of the Fortune 1000 companies have a woman at the top now. That's not so much to be celebrated, that's to be scoffed at. What has taken them so long? And I'm not saying that companies should just rush to go find some woman to put at the top, because that would be a mistake. You're setting those women up to fail if you just give them a position, just to save face. I guarantee that there are qualified women within each of your ranks. I guarantee that many of them are seeking out that position that you are passing them over for. I'm not saying just give them the position just to make everyone happy. Just give them an equal opportunity to reach that position to begin with. And something's got to be done about how women are held to this ridiculously higher standard than men are in the workforce. Like, women have to work extra hard just to keep their position. And there's going to be a story later on where you find out that certain people at the top are able to get away with murder, while people at the bottom, they have to bust their butts just to get any recognition. Well, it's kind of the situation with women. If we're going to talk about inequality, you can't escape the inequality in gender when you talk about inequality. It's unavoidable. This is the longest existing case of inequality in our human existence. Women have been held down for far too long. And we can't ever expect to advance ourselves as a species, much less a nation, for as long as women are held down. Until women can be expected to earn 100% of what men earn and have 100% of the same opportunities that men have, until we reach that point, we'll never be truly free. We'll never be equal. And we'll never prosper. Moving on. Affordable fatness. The title of this article is Cheap Food to Blame for the Obesity Epidemic. The source is CBS News. The author is Jessica Ferger. And it was published on May 22nd. Americans, well, these are the bullet points, by the way, sorry. Number 1, Americans are now spending less than 10% compared to 25% 80 years ago of our disposable income on food. This kind of ties in with the gas subject that we just talked about a little bit earlier. Number 2, cheap food has a stronger connection to the rise in obesity than any other factor. Number 3, subsidies in corn and soybean production have exacerbated the problem by enabling the cheaper production of processed food. And number 4, taxing unhealthy food and subsidizing healthy food will have a minimal impact. Now, this is sort of a bubble that's going to burst on us. We can't expect to keep living the way we have been without consequences. You know, this isn't a matter of people intentionally choosing to consume things that are unhealthy for them. Excuse me. For many people, it's a matter of necessity. You have to spend your income on a limited number of things. We mentioned gas earlier, which eats up a larger and larger portion of our paychecks, with every passing day, it seems. And you have your necessities, especially if you have babies at home. That's another giant chunk of your paycheck right there. I mean, I'm glad both of my kids are potty trained because that was a nightmare financially. And even if you are on assistance, the price of food can be nightmarish at times. Especially when, like I mentioned earlier, with the droughts, or with the climate change story, you have droughts impacting the price of food, gas prices impacting the price of food. You're forced into a position where you have to buy the cheapest food you can find. Like it or not, that cheap food makes you fatter. It just does. A lot of these people, yeah, granted, they buy sodas and certain fattening food. But you know, we can ban people who are on food assistance from being able to buy these things, or at least ban them from using assistance to get those things. Good luck, of course, fighting the industries who profit from that. Actually, it's not going to settle well with them. But yeah, I mean, we can do that. And actually, I'm personally an advocate for doing that. However, that's not really going to solve the problem, because a part of our regular diet also includes these processed foods that are much cheaper to buy than organic foods. Now, yeah, it says here that taxing unhealthy food and subsidizing healthy food will have a minimal impact. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't do something about that. I mean, but this is, it does go deeper than that. This is also about culture. And we are used to having certain things. We are used to having certain meals. You look at other cultures across the planet, particularly in Asia, with the specific focus on Japan, life expectancies are higher in that part of the world, in part as well as like in Greece and stuff, because of their culture, and their culture involves certain eating habits. I'm not saying overnight we have to shift the way we eat, but we do have to teach our children and even re-educate ourselves about our eating habits. I'm personally in the midst of trying to change my whole life around regarding how I consume food. Granted, some habits just die hard, but the fact is that this is a problem which is affecting us all, and the food problem, which is connected to inequality, because some people who can afford to buy the healthiest food, they don't have to worry about their health so much, and you have people who just can't afford it. I mean, you could tax the unhealthy food all you want, but all you're going to do is just make it harder for them to feed themselves. And you'll be forced to buy the more expensive organic food, because the previously cheaper food is now taxed so highly that it is just as unaffordable as the healthy food. And you could do that, but ultimately we have to come to a point to where we're subsidizing the right things, and we have to recognize that this epidemic connects with others, especially the health issue, our healthcare costs. That is deeply connected with obesity and the rise of diabetes. Certain cancers develop because you're overweight. Well, we have to get a handle on this. Sorry to have droned on that one. It's mostly because it's kind of personal to me, but anyways, I will move on. Debt collectors. The title is Sallie Mae torments faithful student borrowers after co-signers die. The source is Huffington Post. The author is, I know I'm going to butcher your name, I'm sorry, Shaheen Nasripour. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. And the date of the article is May 21st. The bullet points of this article are as follows. Number one, families of students who have purportedly stayed up to date on their loan repayments have been harassed by Sallie Mae's debt collector when a co-signer dies. Number two, there was at least a couple incidents wherein Sallie Mae and the contracted debt collector communicate two different things to the concerned borrowers, thus indicating that the debts may be getting collected by a rogue entity. Number three, other banks are upset that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau seemingly cast all these lending institutions into one predatory category when the agency highlighted Sallie Mae's abuses. Number four, at least one family received relief from the harassment thanks to the help of their congressman. Now, as a recently graduated student, the issue of student loan debt hits close to home. My mother, who passed away a couple years ago, would have loved to help me by participating in helping me co-sign. And reality is that we weren't in a good financial position. Anyways, I had to use financial aid. But for the people who don't qualify for financial aid or have expended that completely and have to go towards private loans, it means a great deal when you have to go to a private loan, you have to use a cosigner, and then suddenly you're already grieving from the loss of your family member, but when the loss of your family member results in you getting harassed, by this debt collector, it's just, it makes you regret ever going to school in the first place. And that's not the message we want to send, especially in an economy that is increasingly dependent on education, advanced education. More and more employers are demanding that you have a degree in one field or another before they can even hire you, unless you of course want to be making minimum wage for the rest of your life. That's, we don't have the same economy that we did back in the 60s and 50s or even the 70s. This is a very different economy, with more and more being demanded of us, particularly as far as education is concerned. And looking to advance yourself, looking to rise above poverty, should not in turn be a recipe for permanent debt. Not only that, you shouldn't have to fear who you have as your cosigner. You should not have to look at your cosigner and say, you know what, I don't expect you to be able to, I don't think you're going to live long enough, for this to make a difference, a positive difference in my life. Maybe I should go find someone who's my age and perhaps healthier than me to cosign. I mean, the whole point of a cosigner is it helps you have a little bit of weight there in your favor as you're taking out a loan. I mean, at the very least, let these people mourn for a second before you start trying to collect on them. And give them some notice, give them a window to try and shift the signer. I mean, it talks about a little bit in this article about how these families were trying to negotiate with Sally Mae and its debt collector, to get them to change the cosigner, change the name. I mean, is it really that difficult? I mean, in the end, what it is these companies, they want their money as soon as possible. And you think you're getting an opportunity by being able to take out a loan, but because of the interest and everything, these companies have an incentive to lend to you because they're going to profit majorly from that in the end when you do pay them back. And they'll get their money regardless. These types of practices need to be they need to be tackled. Something has to be done. And for the fact that this one family in particular had to contact their congressman to get the harassments to stop, and because these families were families that had been up to date, as I said on here. They weren't delinquent payers. That they were doing everything right. It's just they had the misfortune of losing a family member who happened to be a cosigner. And for them to have to get their congressman to come in and save the day, that's just terrible. That's terrifying. I mean, how do we expect our economy to be able to evolve in the future for all of our benefit if this is the type of thing we have to worry about? It's more plutocratic than anything. And one other thing, the other banks being outraged by the CFPB for, seemingly casting a broad light on all of them, casting them all into one category. It might say something about your institution if, certain wording in a expose like that, cringes you a little bit. I mean, instead of lashing out the agency who exposes the abuses, go out of your way to demonstrate to your customers that you are practicing, that you're doing your job in good faith, that you're keeping up your end of the bargain. I mean, granted, I don't know what the CFPB said in their report, but I'm just saying the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is doing a good job by exposing these abuses and working in our favor. I obviously have a little bit of bias in that respect. I think we're better off because of that agency. Anyways, proceeding. Yes, number 9. Pluto University. The article's title: The higher a college president's pay, the faster its student debt increases. The source is Think Progress. The author is Abigail Bessler. And the date of its publishing was May 19th. The bullet points are as follows. Number 1, a study shows that student debt in the top 25 universities jumped by 10% in the year between 2010 and 2011, while university presidents enjoyed a boost in pay by a third in the time spanning 2009 to 2012. Number 2, fewer scholarship programs are being utilized, virtually shutting out many impoverished students and forcing others to incur crushing debt. Number 3, there have also been a steady replacement of full-time faculty in favor of cheaper part-time members. Number 4, Senator Warren is planning on resubmitting her legislation to cut student loan interest rates in half, and the study which found the aforementioned figures has proposed that state legislatures take control over the administration to scholarship university spending ratio. This is a true injustice in our education system. It just is. To know that a college president can experience such a boost in his or her salary while the students are just under this elevated mountain of debt that just keeps growing and growing, getting piled up on them. Not to mention that opportunities for the poorest students are being closed off. I mean, not just any poor students, but students who would earn a scholarship, who you would want to come to your university. You want to open up opportunities to people who are less well off. Because many of the greatest minds in all of humanity have been people who are impoverished, who otherwise would not have had their voices heard, who have not been able to reach for the stars. So, this right here, I call this Pluto University because just think about what a plutocracy is. A society that is governed by the rich over the poor, or rather the rich serve at the expense of the poor. This is very similar to that. I mean, I don't know how wealthy these college presidents are, but at a time when you have your students who are severely in debt, and not to mention faculty members are being cut to part-time, or you're just getting rid of your full-time faculty altogether and bringing in temporary replacements, and you have that kind of image compared with a guy or woman at the top being able to collect all this money to themselves and aggrandize their personal wealth, that's not a very good message to send. In essence, it's almost like you're saying, come to this college. I need your money. That's essentially what it is, what it's saying. It's very reminiscent of what you would imagine feudalism as having been like. Just saying. Moving on. Story number 10. Stuck in the Ditch. The article's title: Why Long-Time Unemployed Can't Get Back on Track. The source is Market Watch. The author is, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right, Janelle Marte. I believe it's French. The date of this article was April 7th. Like I said, I didn't put limits on myself on how far back I can go. And the bullet points are as follows. Number 1, only 11% of the long-term unemployed find permanent full-time after a year out of work. Excuse me. Number 2, 7 million people are working in a part-time job when they would much rather work full-time. Number 3, many long-term unemployed take the job they don't want for survival purposes. Number 4, unfortunately, taking a part-time temporary position in an irrelevant field of work can do more harm than good to a job seeker resume as they look to continue working in the area where they are most experienced and interested. Now, I mentioned earlier that I had my own brush with unemployment. I was unemployed for 10 months. I didn't want to go to a temporary job situation because I knew how unstable it was. I had been a janitor before that. I wasn't proud of that, but it got my bills paid. I was full-time, and then I was laid off by a stroke of bad luck. And I did what I had to do. After I got laid off, desperate for work. I didn't want to be unemployed. I went into this temporary position where I worked for a month. And after that temporary assignment ended on me, I just decided I'm not going back into temporary work. I'm going to wait for a full-time position to open up. And I'm going to go for that. So I spent 10 months unemployed, holding out. When I exhausted all my regular unemployment benefits and started going to the federal unemployment benefits, there was a period of time in 2010 where there was genuine fear that the extended unemployment benefits were going to be allowed to expire, and that I and my family would virtually be screwed. I wasn't exactly making it very well on the unemployment benefits, but we weren't homeless because I was using those benefits to the best of my ability. I was making it last. I was making it worthwhile. And not only that, you consider it's unemployment insurance. You pay into it as you work, and as you pay taxes as well while you work. Now, granted, being poor, I qualified for earned income tax credit, and that helped me a lot. But so that basically means I wasn't so much paying directly into the federal extended unemployment benefits, but I did do my part, essentially. But when it comes down to it, unemployment benefits helped me get through, and when I was afraid that they were going to expire on me, I chose to become a temporary employee. I'm sorry I was droning on and on. I almost lost my train of thought. It's my fault. The point is, it was there, but I went to the temp service, and it was a nightmare. For 2 years of my life, I went from one temp assignment to the next as each of them ended. Oftentimes, they would end after a week, 2 weeks. I just couldn't stabilize anything. So that's one area where I can empathize with the fear of jumping into temporary work after, when you're in a stable situation at the very least with your unemployment. At least it's there. It's something you can depend on to a degree while you're looking to further your career. You weren't at fault to begin with for being laid off. Why should you punish yourself even further by going into temp services? And eventually, I got out of the temp service hell and I went to work where I am now as a part-time cashier. I know it's practically a demotion, but it at least gets my bills paid. A lot of these employees, though, when they have to make that hard choice, like this article says, they they do some damage to their resume. And employers, they look at how long it's been since you've been in your relevant field of work. Honestly, it's problematic. Sorry about that. Had to cut things short there for a second. So yeah, you're not advancing your career anymore when you go into an irrelevant field of work. And it does more harm than good. So, by the way, when I just did that just now, I had to hold the time. There was some commotion outside, and I didn't want to interrupt the show. Anyways, moving on. point is that if you really want people to be able to pursue their dreams or to be productive in society, you can't expect them to do serious damage to the careers that they worked hard to establish. It defies everything that we know and love about the American dream that we've been fed since childhood. Again, sorry for that distraction there. This being a prolonged show, that's likely to happen in this situation, but in future episodes, but shorter episodes, it's going to be a lot less likely to happen. Item number 11, big spenders versus bad luck. Article's title is, No, People Don't Get Buried in Credit Card Debt Because They're Bad with Money. The source is Think Progress. The author is Bryce Covert. I know, yet again. Date of its publishing was May 10th. And the bullet points are as follows. Number 1. A study found that credit card debt has much more to do with unforeseen terrible circumstances than with a recklessly lavish lifestyle. Number 2. Experiencing a layoff, falling behind in housing expenses, and emergency healthcare spending contribute a great deal to the debt at issue. Number 3. Those with credit card debt are less likely to have anything in the bank compared to those whose debt are under control. And number 4. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to spend what money you have on the essentials, as opposed to treating yourself to the finer things in life. A lot has been said over time about credit card debt, and I unfortunately confess that I used to think some of the same things that are stereotyped over time about those who are in debt. I used to assume that you were in bad debt with credit cards because you just didn't know how to control your spending. You were frivolous with it. But reading this article and things I've learned over time have educated me on this, have taught me that it's not so cut and dry, it's not so clear that these people were careless with their money or with other people's money. Things happen in life. I keep mentioning this as a constant theme throughout this episode, that there are external factors to your existence which determine your course. Especially regarding the issue of a layoff. Other expenses just pile up over time. All it takes is one bad thing happening, and it causes a domino effect. Your whole life can be just dictated by that one incident, by that one twist of events. And the same thing with these people who are in debt with credit cards because they turn to the credit card when all else failed. And yet society judges them poorly, much like they do people who live in those tent cities, much like they do us millennials, or like they do with the obese. They assume the worst about you. They don't consider that there's more to the story than what you think there is. And this last point here about the poorer you are, the more likely you are to spend what money you have on the essentials. I know this from personal experience. I very seldomly do I ever buy something for myself. For the most part, when I have money, I spend it on my bills or I get something for my kids. Honestly, I haven't really been able to do much of that. I try to make my money last as long as I can. And honestly, if it wasn't for the assistance that I get, I'd be homeless. My kids would be starving, or they would have been taken away from me by now. There's no telling where I'd be. I certainly wouldn't have an education. The money I get, I don't splurge. I just don't. I try to live my life responsibly. Just life happens. Alright, last item. Representation without taxation. Save this one for last for a specific reason. Article's title is U.S. corporations are exploiting a huge tax loophole, but the GOP doesn't want to close it. The source is New Republic. The author is Danny Vinick. I am hoping I pronounced that correctly. I know I've been saying that a lot too. The date of this publishing was May 21st. Bullet points are as follows. Number 1, 2 congressional Democrats who happen to be brothers are looking to change corporate tax law to ensure that corporations stop dodging taxes by way of using loopholes in current law. Number 2, presently a company merely has to move 1/5 of its assets overseas to be exempt from paying the 35% corporate tax rate, despite being headquartered and doing the bulk of their business in the United States. Number 3, the proposed change would require these companies to give foreign shareholders at least half of their assets in order to be exempt. And number 4, congressional Republicans are pushing back by claiming that the solution is to make America more business-friendly so that companies will stop trying to avert the tax. I don't have much time left, so I'm going to try and make this count. And this is just time before I have to go to my closing comments, by the way. Anyways, all I have to say is that paying your taxes is your patriotic duty. Plain and simple. Granted, these are loopholes created by law. They just exist. But it's not a crime to ask these companies to pay their fair share. Our lawmakers made the mistake of creating this loophole to begin with. It's time to close it. There's no reason why a company should be headquartered here, do most of their business here, and get away with paying no taxes at all. An advantage not enjoyed by small businesses, by the way, or by companies that are bound to this nation. It's only multinational companies who are mostly headquartered and do their business here. It is unpatriotic for them to even want to do this to begin with. But it is unthinkable for Congress to permit it to go on. We can't talk about deficits until we talk about this, about issues like this. Making everyone who can pay their fair share. This is also an extension of the issue of inequality. Because those who have the most advantages, produced by the many, those people, the ones with the advantages, are the ones who are not willing to give back to the community which gave rise to their power and influence to begin with. Alright. Trying to shut that thing off. Sorry. I beat it by like a minute, I think. Which I probably extended my time a little bit by pausing it and holding the clock a little bit. But anyways, a little recap is in order. Excuse me. Recaps. The main points of tonight's stories, all 12 of them. Number 1, Americans are being forced to form their own communities. Number 2, young Americans are coming of age in an era when opportunity seems to be further out of reach than any other point in the post-war age. Number 3, humanity's impact on the climate is creating havoc in our food supply. Number 4, small businesses seem worse off than before the recession, though they weren't in a great position to begin with, and are getting overwhelmed by an economy dominated by large store franchises as well as a lack of access to the resources they need to compete. Number 5, the price of gas is an economic menace in and of itself, and is driven in part by a trade trick which inflates the price of commodities. Number 6, women still have the odds stacked against them in the workforce, especially at the top. Number 7, Our weight crisis is connected to our income crisis. Number 8. In death, well-meaning family members are causing their loved ones much more grief than necessary simply by passing away before a student loan could be paid in full. Number 9. College presidents are enjoying the good life as the primary source of their riches are buried under a mountain of debt. Number 10. Unemployment has become a cruel trap for those unfortunate enough to fall to the chopping block. Number 11. Owing your soul to a credit card company communicates nothing about your frugality. And number 12. The wealthiest among us are shirking their patriotic duty to pay part of the bill by exploiting the loopholes that some are now trying to close. Alright, now for my farewell message. This has been the introduction episode of the Inequality Chronicles. From now on a weekly to bi-weekly basis, these shows will be brought to you up to half an hour long. Could be like 15 minutes from time to time, who knows. But at least half an hour, well not at least, but up to half an hour long. Excuse me, I'm changing my wording on myself. These messages will be brought to you on a weekly to bi-weekly basis to help you see the bigger picture here. I'm doing this because I don't see enough being talked about and talked in the media about it. Our pundits are failing us. Our media is failing us. These stories are out there. These articles are out there. Obviously, I just found all of them. I found 12 of them. I put them together here for you. Part of the problem with my generation is that we don't have time. Or we're just not concerned enough about these things to look for these articles. But my nerdy interest in politics and current events overall, I'm deciding to take advantage of that and to try and appeal to you, my generation, and the rest of us who don't normally have the time to look for these articles and read through them. So, granted, this episode was long. I'm sorry about that. But in the future, I will try to be sure to make them easy to view and informative enough to where you walk away knowing a little bit more about the injustices being done in your name. This society is only going to function properly in the way it was meant to if we come together. If we realize what's going on and act together to bring an end to this inequality, to at least address it. I mean, as long as we have the system that we have, we may always have inequality, but as long as we can make it manageable, give people a realistic chance of climbing up out of poverty. I'm not talking about making everybody rich. I personally, because I've been downtrodden for so long, the only reason why I want to be rich is just to pay all my bills, pay all my debts, give my kids a decent future. But in reality, what I really want is what most Americans want. And that's just to be able to enjoy life. You know, have your hard work pay off in the end. But if we don't address these problems, the lessons of history teach us that inequality creates an atmosphere that is conducive for violence, social upheaval. You know, the revolutions in the Eastern Hemisphere are not unique to that hemisphere. It is a natural reaction to when the deck has been stacked against you. The deck has been stacked against you, sorry. It is. It's just a natural reaction to that. And what I fear is that if we don't get a handle on this, a revolution will come home. And I honestly don't want my kids to grow up in that type of situation. I don't want your kids to either. Nor do I want us to live to see such a day when people have to become so desperate that they just take to the streets and take up arms against people they perceive to be their oppressors. This danger is very real. And honestly, time is running out to set the record straight. We've gone on long enough. In future episodes, my closing statements will be also governed by this, as will my introductory statements, because everything will have to be done within the half-hour window. But I gave myself some leeway today because this was the first episode. I thank you for your patience and for taking the time out of your day to watch. Have a nice night.